The ritual wasn't supposed to do this. John Constantine stood in the center of the circle's cigarette ash, falling onto sigils that pulsed with borrowed light. Zatanna's hands traced patterns in the air beside him, her lips moving through words that bent reality at its seams. Above them both, Dr. Fate hovered in perfect stillness, the helm of Nabu gleaming gold against Gotham's perpetual twilight. They were sealing a crack in the bleed. Standard maintenance for a multiverse that leaked more often than anyone wanted to admit. Constantine had done this dozens of times. Zatanna could manage it in her sleep. Even fate, bound to cosmic order itself, considered this routine. The sigils flared. Energy coiled through the circle like a serpent, finding its prey. Constantine felt the familiar tug of dimensional fabric knitting itself back together. Zatanna's incantation hit its crescendo. Everything should have closed, should have settled, should have returned Gotham's sky to its usual industrial gray. Instead, the air split, not a tear, not a rupture, something colder. The space above the city buckled like a screen loading corrupted data. Constantine's cigarette fell from his lips. Zatanna's hands froze mid-gesture. Even fate eternal and implacable tilted his head in what might have been confusion. The sky didn't crack open. It just changed. One moment empty air. The next a presence. Massive. Geometric. Wrong in a way that had nothing to do with magic or madness. A structure materialized above Gotham's eastern industrial district, settling into reality with the weight of something that had always been there and was only now choosing to be seen. The great tomb of Nazarick. It didn't announce itself, didn't send heralds or manifestos. The building simply existed, black stone rising, in impossible architecture, 9 floors visible and uncountable layers implied. It sat in the air 300 feet above abandoned warehouses, displacing nothing, destroying nothing. No explosion, no shockwave. Just presence absolute and undeniable. Constantine's hands moved by instinct, tracing wards that should have repelled dimensional intrusions. The sigils sparked, flared, and died. He tried again. Same result. Bollocks! Zatanna's voice came out tight. That's not from the bleed. No. Fate descended slowly, light from the helm washing over the ritual circle. His voice carried the weight of cosmic law. It is not. Constantine looked up at the structure. His practiced eye caught details that shouldn't exist. The angles were wrong, but perfectly stable. The shadows fell in directions that violated every rule of optics. And underneath it all, a sensation he'd felt only once before when he'd accidentally brushed against a shard of pure information that predated language itself. What is it then? Zatanna stepped to the circle's edge, her hands still glowing with residual power. Fate was silent for 3 full seconds. When he spoke, his tone carried something Constantine had never heard from the Lord of Order before. Uncertainty. The ritual did not open a door, Fate said. It anchored something already in motion, something that exists outside the framework of established law. Constantine lit another cigarette with shaking hands. Outside the framework. Brilliant. Cosmic bureaucracy doesn't recognize it, so it just gets to waltz in. Not precisely. Fate turned golden light sweeping across the impossible structure. Nazarick exists in a state of instance. A contained reality that has not yet been integrated into this multiverse's natural order. The presence observes. The specter watches. But neither can act. Why not? Zatanna's voice sharpened. Because it has not yet committed a violation that demands judgment. Fate's hands spread a gesture of cosmic helplessness. It simply is. And until it chooses to interact with creation in a manner that breaks divine law, it remains in a state of protected transition. Constantine exhaled smoke through his teeth. So we just opened the door for something that can't be uninvited. We did not open anything. Fate's correction was precise. We stabilized the bleed. But in doing so, we created the conditions for this entity to anchor itself to our reality. It was already seeking entry. We merely provided the threshold. The three of them stood in silence, staring up at the tomb. Gotham's usual sounds had died. No sirens, no distant shouting. Even the ever-present hum of the city's infrastructure had dropped to nothing. It was as if the entire Eastern District was holding its breath. Constantine's eyes narrowed. For just a moment he thought he saw something. A flicker at the edge of perception, like text scrolling across reality itself. Numbers, designations, a heads-up display that shouldn't exist outside of video games and schizophrenic hallucinations. He blinked. It was gone. "John!" Zatanna's hand found his arm. "Did you see that?" "Yeah." His voice came out rougher than intended. "System interface. Like the world just became a game someone else is playing." Fate descended until his feet touched the rooftop where they'd drawn the circle. His gaze never left Nazarick. This is not an invasion. This is not a dimensional bleed or a cosmic incursion. This is something far more complex. Constantine ground his cigarette under his heel. "So what do we call it then?" Fate's voice carried it across the silent city like a pronouncement of fate itself. "A login. Another system has entered our world, and it brought its own rules." The tomb hung in the air above Gotham, dark and patient and utterly still, waiting. Not hostile, not peaceful. Just present like a mountain that had decided to relocate and was now politely informing the landscape it would not be leaving. Constantine looked at Zatanna. Zatanna looked at Fate. Fate looked at the impossible structure that now occupied Gotham's skyline. None of them moved to attack. None of them suggested banishment. They all understood, even without speaking, that the normal tools wouldn't work here. Whatever Nazarick was, whatever law it operated under, it had just rewritten the rules of engagement. And somewhere inside that black stone tomb, something was watching them back. The city remained silent. The sky remained changed. And in the distance, barely audible over the sound of three magicians trying to process the impossible, came a sound like reality, learning to accept what it could not reject. Gotham had a new neighbor, and the neighbor was here to stay. Batman arrived at the perimeter 40 minutes after Nazarick's appearance. He came alone, which meant he'd already assessed the threat as something requiring observation before action. The Batmobile sat 3 blocks back, sensors running full-spectrum analysis on the structure that now dominated Gotham's eastern skyline. The data made no sense. Energy readings fluctuated between 0 and levels that should have triggered seismic warnings across half the eastern seaboard. Spatial measurements reported the tomb as simultaneously 300 feet above ground and occupying negative elevation. Thermal imaging showed cold spots that violated thermodynamic law. Every scanner he'd brought was telling him something different, and all of them were probably wrong. Superman landed beside him without a sound. No cape flourish, no dramatic entrance. Clark Kent had learned decades ago that Bruce Wayne didn't appreciate theatrics during crisis assessment. Wonder Woman touched down on Batman's other side a moment later, her eyes already locked on the structure above them. "Constantine briefed me." Superman's voice was measured. "He said it's not an invasion." "It's not." Batman didn't look away from his scanner. "It's worse." Diana's hand rested on the pommel of her sword, not drawing, just acknowledging weight and balance. An invasion can be repelled. What's worse than that is than a sovereignty claim. Batman finally lowered the scanner. This isn't an attack. It's a declaration. Whatever that structure is, it's establishing itself as autonomous territory. Superman frowned. "In the middle of Gotham." "Not in Gotham." Batman gestured at the readings scrolling across his gauntlet display. "Separate from Gotham. The spatial coordinates place it in the same physical location as the warehouses below. But it's not displacing them. It's layered on top of reality, like a second image on the same canvas. Diana stepped forward, eyes narrowing. I've seen dimensional overlaps before. The Myskira exists in partial overlap with the mortal world. This feels different. It is different. Batman's jaw tightened. The Myskira exists in harmony with natural law. This is rewriting the rules in its immediate vicinity. My equipment registers it as a localized authority zone. Self-defining. Everything within a quarter-mile radius is subject to altered physics. Superman looked at the warehouses below the tomb. Workers should have been there loading trucks for the night shift. Instead, the area sat empty, not evacuated in panic, just vacant, as if everyone in the zone had simply chosen to be elsewhere. Argus is already mobilizing. Batman pulled up a tactical display. Amanda Waller wants a perimeter established and reconnaissance teams deployed by dawn. The President is convening the Security Council. The UN will debate intervention protocols by noon. They're treating it like a hostile nation. Diana's voice carried an edge. Moving that fast means they're terrified. They should be. Batman closed the display. Because we don't know what we're dealing with, and ignorance kills faster than any weapon. A sound cut through the conversation. Not loud, not threatening, just present. Footsteps measured and precise, approaching from the direction of the tomb's shadow. Two figures emerged from an alley that should have been empty. Not sneaking, not hiding, but clearly allowed to be seen. The first wore a maid uniform that belonged in a Victorian manner, not a Gotham industrial zone. Blonde hair pulled back in a severe style posture, military straight despite the domestic costume. Her eyes swept across the three heroes with the cold assessment of someone cataloging threats. The second maid smiled. Red hair, relaxed stance, an expression of cheerful friendliness that somehow made Batman's threat assessment spike harder than the first woman's obvious martial bearing. Superman moved forward half a step, not aggressive, just ready. We're not here to fight. We're here to establish communication. The blonde maid tilted her head slightly. When she spoke, her voice carried the clipped precision of someone delivering a prepared statement. You are standing at the boundary of Nazarik's sovereign territory. This is a courtesy notification. Batman's hand moved to his utility belt, not drawing just positioning. Nazarik hasn't been recognized by any international body or dimensional authority. Recognition is not required. The maid's expression didn't change. This is not a request for permission. This is an acknowledgement of established fact. The red-haired maid's smile widened slightly. Think of it as a property line. You wouldn't walk into someone's house without knocking, right? Same principle here. Diana's stance shifted weight, redistributing in a way that would allow instant movement in any direction. You're establishing a border in the middle of a populated city without consultation or consent. Consultation wasn't necessary. The blonde maid gestured behind her toward the tomb. Lord Ainz has claimed this territory. The boundary is set. Cross it without authorization, and there will be consequences. Superman's eyes narrowed. That sounds like a threat. It's a statement of policy. The red-haired maid's tone stayed light, almost playful, which made her words land harder. We're not interested in conflict, but we're very good at protecting what's ours. Batman's mind raced through tactical scenarios. Two maids, uniform suggesting a larger organization, military bearing under domestic costume, the casual confidence of people who knew they had overwhelming force backing them. This wasn't first contact. This was a notification after the fact. We need to speak with whoever's in charge. Superman's voice stayed level. Ainz, you said we can negotiate terms that work for everyone. The blonde maid's expression didn't soften. Lord Ainz does not negotiate terms. Lord Ainz establishes them. If you wish to request an audience, you may submit a formal petition through proper channels. Proper channels? Batman's voice went flat. We're standing in Gotham. This is Earth, our jurisdiction. Was. The red-haired maid's smile never wavered. Now it's a little more complicated. Diana took a single step forward. Not aggressive, but absolutely unwilling to concede ground. We have responsibility for protecting this planet and its people. That doesn't change because someone decides to claim territory. Protecting people. The blonde maid's head tilted again, a gesture that might have been consideration or might have been mockery. How admirable. Lord Ainz also values the protection of his domain. Perhaps you have more in common than you think. Then let us speak with him. Superman spread his hands open and non-threatening. Face to face. We can find common ground. Perhaps. The red-haired maid shrugged. But not tonight. Tonight we're just here to deliver the message. Stay outside the boundary. Don't send scouts. Don't attempt infiltration. Respect the line and there won't be problems. Batman's jaw set. And if we don't, both maids looked at him. The blonde's expression remained neutral. The red-haired one's smile finally faded, replaced by something colder. Then Lord Ainz will demonstrate why respecting the boundary is in everyone's best interest. The two figures turned and walked back toward the shadows. Superman started to follow, stopped by Batman's hand on his arm. Wait. Bruce, we can't just let them. Look at the ground. Superman looked down. So did Diana. Where the maids had been standing, the concrete showed frost patterns. Not ice. Not cold damage. Just marks, delicate and precise, like the pavement itself had decided to acknowledge their presence and record it permanently. The maids vanished into shadow. No teleportation flash. No dimensional rift. They simply stopped being visible, as if the darkness itself had accepted them back into its fold. The three heroes stood in silence for 10 seconds. That was a demonstration. Batman's voice was soft. They could have been invisible the entire time. They chose to be seen. Diana's hand finally left her sword. They wanted us to know they're watching, that they can approach whenever they choose. Superman looked up at the tomb. Lights had appeared in some of the windows, warm and steady, like a castle preparing for evening. This isn't going to end with a fight, is it? No. Batman turned away, heading back toward the perimeter. It's going to end with the entire world, learning to live with a neighbor we never invited and can't remove. Behind them, Nazarick sat in perfect stillness. No threats broadcast, no weapons displayed. Just presence absolute and immovable, a fact that reality itself had accepted, even if the Justice League hadn't. Across the city, phones began ringing. In Washington, emergency meetings convened. At Argus headquarters, Amanda Waller stared at satellite imagery that showed nothing but static where Nazarick stood. In the watchtower, alarms signaled a dimensional anomaly that every cosmic sensor registered and none could explain. And in Gotham streets, ordinary people who'd been about to enter the zone found themselves choosing different routes. Not fleeing in panic, not driven away by force, just deciding in the moment that they'd rather be somewhere else. The city adjusted. The boundary held. And in the space between acknowledgement and acceptance, Gotham learned to live with the impossible. Nazarick had arrived. The territory was claimed. And everyone from street-level heroes to cosmic entities was trying to determine what that meant. The only certainty was that the rules had changed. And no one knew who'd written the new ones. Inside the great tomb of Nazarick Ainz, Ooal sat motionless on his throne. The chamber stretched vast and empty around him, black marble floors reflecting torchlight that never flickered. Guardians stood at attention along the walls, perfect statues of deadly intent waiting for orders that would come in their own time. Ainz spoke without preamble. His voice carried no emotion, no urgency, just the weight of absolute authority. We gather information, we measure capabilities, we do not escalate. Albedo stepped forward, her wings folding tight against her armor. And if they attempt infiltration, Lord Ainz, capture, examine, Release. Ainz's skeletal fingers tapped once against the armrest. We are not here to wage war. We are here to establish understanding. Demiurge adjusted his glasses, a smile playing at his lips. A surgical approach? Calculated pressure to determine breaking points without actually breaking anything. Brilliant, as always, Lord Ainz. Ainz said nothing. Let them interpret genius into pragmatism. He needed data, not bodies. Victory without information was just noise. Aura, Mare. Both twins looked up. Prepare the perimeter. Make it educational. Aura grinned. Mare nodded, clutching his staff tighter. Pleiades. Ainz's gaze swept across the chamber to where 6 maids stood in perfect formation. Standard reconnaissance protocols. Learn their systems. Do not be caught unless you choose to be caught. Yuri Alpha bowed. As you command, Lord Ainz. Demiurge. The demon looked up, already anticipating. Begin analysis. I want to know how they think before they know we're asking. It will be my pleasure. Ainz rose from the throne. The movement was slow, deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who understood that every gesture would be observed and interpreted. This world operates under different rules. We will learn those rules. Then we will decide what comes next. The Guardians bowed as one. Ainz walked through them without another word, his robes trailing behind like shadow-made fabric. The game had begun. And Ainz' Ooal gown had never lost a game by playing fairly. 12 hours later, an Argus tactical team breached the perimeter. They came prepared. Full hazard suits rated for dimensional instability. Weapons loaded with anti-magic rounds. Sensors calibrated to detect everything from thaumic radiation to quantum fluctuations. Amanda Waller had handpicked this unit. The best infiltrators in the agency, veterans of missions, against meta-human threats, supernatural incursions, and technology so advanced it looked like witchcraft. They crossed the boundary line at 0300 hours. Silent, professional. Moving with the coordinated precision of people who'd trained together for years. The first anomaly appeared 30 seconds in. Agent Rodriguez checked his weapon and froze. The rifle felt wrong. Not malfunctioning, just different. He looked down at the HUD display in his visor and saw text that shouldn't exist. Item tactical rifle level 1 durability, 100% effective range. Standard human projectile weapon. He blinked. The text remained. Command, are you seeing this? The radio crackled. Static, then Waller's voice sharp and controlled. Seeing what, Rodriguez? My weapon. It's showing game statistics. Silence on the line, then elaborate. Level 1, durability rating. It's like someone turned my rifle into a video game item. 3 other agents confirmed the same readings. Equipment armor, even their own bodies displayed information in a format that belonged in an RPG, not reality. One agent reported seeing a health bar in the corner of his vision. Another's motion tracker had been replaced by what looked like a mini-map. This is wrong. Agent Chen's voice stayed level despite the words. Everything's been converted to game mechanics. Waller's response came fast. Can you still operate? Yes, ma'am. Equipment functions normally. It just registers differently. Then proceed. Gather what you can and extract. The team moved deeper into the zone. Buildings that had been warehouses now looked subtly different. Not damaged. Not altered. Just rendered like someone had rebuilt them, using slightly incorrect textures. The ground felt solid, but somehow less real, as if the physics had been simplified to something more manageable. Agent Rodriguez raised his hand, signaling halt. Ahead, the terrain had changed. What should have been a straight street now curved in ways that violated municipal planning and basic geometry. Trees that hadn't been there yesterday cast shadows that moved independent of the light source. We've got environmental manipulation, Chen reported. Active terraforming. Something moved in those wrong shadows. Small, fast, definitely not human. The creature stepped into the light. Scaled skin, too many teeth eyes that glowed with predatory intelligence. Behind it 3 more, then 6, then a dozen. Not attacking, just watching, circling. Contact. Rodriguez's finger moved to his trigger. Multiple hostiles. Stand down. The voice came from above them. Young, female, cheerful in a way that made Rodriguez's threat assessment spike. A girl sat on a branch that hadn't been there a moment ago. Dark skin animal ears, clothes that looked designed for mobility. She swung her legs casually, smiling down at the tactical team, like they were guests at a party she was hosting. You're not supposed to be here. Her tone stayed light. No accusation, just statement of fact. Rodriguez kept his weapon trained on the creatures. We're conducting authorized reconnaissance. Authorized by who? The girl tilted her head. Not by us, and we're the ones who live here now. More creatures emerged from the shadows, larger ones. Things with too many limbs and not enough eyes. A wolf the size of a small car. Something that looked like it had been assembled from nightmares and given teeth. We don't want trouble. Chen's voice stayed diplomatic. We're just gathering information. Information's dangerous. A second voice softer. A boy stepped into view wearing robes too big for his frame. He held a staff that hummed with barely contained power. You should leave. The ground beneath the team's feet rippled, not breaking, just becoming uncertain like reality had developed trust issues. Last warning. The girl's smile faded, not replaced by anger, just something colder. Walk away, or we make this educational. Rodriguez made the call. Command requesting permission to engage. Waller's response was immediate. Negative. Fall back. This is a reconnaissance mission, not a combat operation. Ma'am, we're surrounded. Then surrender if necessary. I want you back alive with whatever data you've gathered. That's an order. The team lowered their weapons. Slowly. Keeping hands visible, the creatures moved in. Fast. Professional. Disarming the agents with movements that spoke of training and absolute confidence. No one was hurt. No one was killed. They were simply rendered irrelevant to the outcome. A maid appeared from nowhere. Blonde hair, severe expression. She looked at each agent with the detachment of someone cataloging inventory. You will be escorted to the boundary and released. Your equipment will be returned minus any recording devices. Consider this a courtesy. Rodriguez met her eyes. What are you people? We are Nazarick. The maid's expression didn't change. And you have just learned lesson 1. Your systems don't work here. Our rules do. They were marched to the perimeter. Professional, efficient. No threats, no violence, just the absolute certainty of people who knew they controlled every variable. At the boundary line, their weapons were returned, ammunition intact. Nothing damaged, just emptied of anything that could transmit data. Agent Chen looked back at the zone. The creatures were gone. The strange geometry had settled back to something approaching normal. But the sense of being watched remained. What do we tell Waller? Rodriguez checked his rifle. The game statistics had vanished the moment they crossed back into normal space. We tell her the truth. We walked into someone else's server and they showed us exactly how much access we don't have. Inside, Nazarick Demiurge reviewed the collected data with the satisfaction of someone who'd just been handed exactly what he wanted. The Argus team's equipment had been thoroughly examined before being wiped. Tactical protocols, communication hierarchies, response patterns, even the psychological profiles hidden in their mission briefings. Predictable. He closed the folder, smiling. They sent their best, which means their best follows doctrine. Doctrine is exploitable. Solution Epsilon materialized beside him, wiping her hands on her apron, despite having touched nothing. The digital infiltration went smoothly. Their databases have interesting security, competent but designed for threats they understand. And we are not a threat they understand. Demiurge's smile widened. Which gives us time. How much did Narberol extract? Personnel files, strategic assets, emergency protocols for supernatural threats. Everything we need to know how they'll react next time. Excellent. Demiurge returned to where Aura and Mare stood, both looking pleased with themselves. Your demonstration was appropriately educational. No casualties. None. Aura shrugged. They were smart enough to surrender. Mare didn't even need to reshape the terrain permanently. Mare nodded, clutching his staff. Just temporary adjustments, nothing that won't fade in a few hours. Demiurge made notes, long fingers moving across parchment that recorded information in script too precise to be natural. Lord Ainz will be pleased. We've established capability without creating martyrs. We've gathered intelligence without triggering escalation. And most importantly, we've demonstrated that their technology operates by our permission, not their authority. CZ Delta entered the chamber, her expression as blank as always. She held up a small device. Their communication encryption, broken. We'll share with Lupus Regina for psychological operations if needed. Hold that capability in reserve. Demiurge's tone sharpened slightly. Let them believe their communications are secure. Better to listen to what they say when they think we're not listening. The demon turned to a window overlooking Gotham. The city continued its normal rhythms, apparently oblivious to the fact that a sovereign power had just humiliated its premier intelligence agency without firing a shot. They'll send diplomats next, Demiurge mused. Or magic users, probably both. They'll try to negotiate, probe for weaknesses, determine our intentions. And Lord Ainz's response, Solution asked, will be exactly what it needs to be. Demiurge's reflection in the window smiled. Patient, measured, absolute. He turned away from the glass hands folded behind his back. This world thinks in terms of invasion and defense. Heroes and villains, right and wrong. They will try to fit us into those categories because that's how they understand threats. But we're not a threat. Aura said it like a challenge. No. Demiurge's smile turned cold. We're something worse. We're a fact they can't change, and the moment they understand that the real game begins. Above them, in his throne room, Ainz Ooal Gown reviewed the same data. The Argus infiltration, the creature demonstrations, the information extraction. All of it had gone precisely as expected, which meant Demiurge had planned it well. Good. Let the demon believe in genius. Let the Guardian see infallible strategy. Ainz saw only what he'd always seen. Variables being measured, risks being assessed, a world being mapped one careful test at a time. He closed the reports and leaned back in his throne. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just the quiet knowledge that another piece had moved into position. Gotham didn't know it yet, but the test phase was complete. Nazarick understood how this world responded to pressure, how its systems worked, how its heroes thought. And now that Ainz had the measurements, he could begin the actual work. Not conquest, not war. Just the slow, inevitable process of making the world understand that some boundaries existed, whether permission was granted or not. The data said they'd learn eventually. The question was how much it would cost them to accept what they couldn't prevent. Ainz already knew the answer. The world just hadn't figured it out yet. Constantine stood at the boundary 2 days after the Argus disaster, smoking his 4th cigarette of the hour. Zatanna adjusted her gloves beside him, fingers flexing in patterns that suggested she was already preparing defensive spells. Dr. Fate hovered a few inches off the ground, silent and observing. This is a terrible idea. Constantine flicked ash onto the pavement. We're walking into the lion's den because they politely implied they might not eat us immediately. We're establishing diplomatic contact. Zatanna's voice carried more confidence than her body language suggested. It's what adults do instead of throwing punches. Adults also don't walk into places where physics takes vacation. Constantine took another drag. But sure, Let's be diplomatic. Fate's voice resonated with cosmic authority. They will allow us entry because they wish to be understood. That desire is leverage, or it's bait. Constantine dropped the cigarette and ground it under his heel, but I'm fresh out of better options. Two figures approached it from the shadow of Nazarick. Different maids this time. One tall and slender, moving with liquid grace. The other shorter, wearing glasses and an expression of professional courtesy that somehow felt worse than open hostility. The tall one spoke first. Lord Ainz has granted your request for audience. You will be escorted to appropriate meeting chambers. No hostile action will be taken unless you initiate conflict. Constantine smiled without humor. How generous. It is. The maid with glasses adjusted them slightly. You have no idea how generous. They walked through the boundary. Constantine felt it immediately, that sense of crossing from one server into another. The air tasted different. Not worse, just other. Like reality had been translated into a language that used the same words but meant something slightly different. The interior of Nazarick exceeded Constantine's worst expectations. Corridors stretched longer than the building's external dimensions should allow. Torches burned without fuel. The walls themselves seemed to watch, not with malice, just with the patient attention of something that had all the time in the world. Zatanna's hand brushed against the stone as they walked. She pulled it back immediately. This place is alive, not alive. Fate's voice remained measured. Aware. There is a difference. They entered a chamber that looked designed for receiving guests who needed to understand their place in the hierarchy. Elegant, but cold. Comfortable, but unwelcoming. A room that said everything about power dynamics without needing to state them explicitly. Demiurge waited in the center, his folded smile perfect. Constantine's instincts screamed. This wasn't the real threat. This was the translator for something worse. Welcome to Nazarick. Demiurge's voice carried the warmth of a merchant greeting customers. I am Demiurge, Chief Strategist and Floor Guardian. Lord Ainz will join us shortly. Please be comfortable. There were chairs. 3 of them. Positioned precisely to put the visitors' backs to the door while facing a throne that currently sat empty. Constantine took a seat without hesitation. Never let them know they've rattled you. Zatanna followed suit. Fate remained hovering, refusing to acknowledge the furniture. Tea! Demiurge gestured. A maid appeared from nowhere, carrying a service that looked older than most nations. No poison in the tea, I assume? Constantine's tone stayed light. None whatsoever. Demiurge's smile widened. Poison would be inefficient. If we wanted you dead, we wouldn't need subtlety. Zatanna leaned forward. Then what do you want? Understanding. Demiurge poured tea with movements that suggested centuries of practice. We want you to understand what Nazarick is, what it represents. Why resistance would be counterproductive. Counterproductive for who? Constantine accepted the tea but didn't drink. Everyone. Demiurge set down the pot. War is expensive. Reconstruction is tedious. Diplomacy, when conducted properly, achieves the same results with significantly less cleanup. Constantine studied the demon. Because that's what this was underneath the suit and glasses. Something old and patient and very good at being underestimated. He'd met demons before, bargained with them, tricked them when possible, survived them when trickery failed. This one was different. This one wasn't offering deals. He was explaining facts. So we talk. Constantine sipped the tea. It was excellent, which somehow made it worse. We established terms. Everyone goes home happy. Ideally. Demiurge's attention shifted to Zatanna. You're analyzing the magic in this structure, trying to determine weaknesses. Zatanna's expression didn't change. Professional curiosity. Understandable? Demiurge adjusted his glasses. You won't find weaknesses. Not because the structure is perfect, but because it operates under a framework your magic doesn't recognize as valid. It's like trying to debug code written in a language your compiler doesn't support. Fate spoke for the first time since entering. You are remarkably forthcoming about your nature, because honesty serves our purposes better than deception. Demiurge's smile never wavered. We don't need to lie. The truth is sufficient. Footsteps echoed through the chamber. Heavy, measured, carrying weight that had nothing to do with physical mass. Ainz Ooal gown entered the room. Constantine had faced down demons, angels, and things that predated both. He'd stared into the abyss and watched it blink first. But this was different. This wasn't malice or hunger or cosmic indifference. This was authority, pure, absolute, undiluted by morality or emotion or anything resembling human limitation. Ainz moved to the throne and sat. The motion was deliberate, calculated to demonstrate that every gesture had meaning. His red eyes settled on the three visitors with the same attention someone might give to interesting chess pieces. You wish to speak. Ainz's voice carried no inflection. Statement, not question. Fate inclined his head fractionally. We seek understanding of your intentions regarding this world. Simple. Ainz's skeletal fingers rested on the throne's armrest. Nazarick requires territory appropriate to its operational needs. Territory requires boundaries. Boundaries require respect. We are establishing all three. Constantine leaned back in his chair, affecting casualness he didn't feel. And if we don't respect those boundaries, then we demonstrate why you should. Ainz tilted his head slightly. But you already know this. The Argus team learned. The question is whether you require additional education or can extrapolate from existing data. Zatanna's hands moved subtly, weaving something defensive. Constantine saw it. So did Demiurge. His smile suggested he found it adorable. We're not here to fight. Zatanna's voice stayed level. We're here to find common ground. Common ground exists. Ainz gestured minimally. Don't cross our boundary without permission. Don't attempt infiltration. Don't interfere with our sovereignty. In return, we don't expand our claim or interfere with your operations outside our territory. That's it. Constantine's skepticism leaked through. You take a chunk of Gotham and we just accept it. Yes. The simplicity of the answer hit harder than any threat. No negotiation, no compromise. Just fact delivered with the confidence of someone who knew debate was irrelevant. Fate's light pulsed once. The cosmic order does not recognize unilateral territorial claims. Then the cosmic order has a documentation problem. Ainz's tone didn't change. We exist. We claim space. The claim is enforced. Recognition is optional. Constantine felt the temperature drop. Not literally, just the sense that they'd reached the actual core of this conversation. You're telling us to accept it or fight about it. His hand moved toward his coat, toward the tricks and charms that had saved his life 100 times before. No! Ainz's eyes glowed slightly brighter. I'm telling you that fighting would be expensive for everyone, and the outcome is predetermined. I'm offering you the opportunity to save resources by accepting reality before it becomes unpleasant. Demiurge spoke softly. Lord Ainz is being remarkably generous. Lesser rulers would simply demonstrate superiority through violence. We prefer efficiency. Zatanna's defensive spell completed. Constantine felt the power coil through the room, ready to activate on her command. Fate's aura intensified, golden light bleeding through the chamber. Ainz didn't move, didn't react, just watched. Is that a threat? Zatanna's voice carried steel. No. Ainz stood slowly. It's a forecast. You're preparing defensive magic. Dr. Fate is channeling cosmic authority. Constantine has 3 charms ready to activate. I'm aware of all of it, and I'm explaining why none of it matters. He gestured once. The air in the chamber changed, not frozen, just waited like time itself had decided to pay closer attention. You operate under rules that made sense in your world. Ainz walked forward 3 steps. Those rules don't apply here. Your magic works by permission. Your cosmic authority is observed but not obeyed. Your tricks are clever, but they're running on outdated architecture. Constantine triggered the charm, a binding hex that had held demons and angels. It flared activated, reached for Ainz, and stopped. Not blocked, not deflected. Just stopped like a program encountering a command it didn't recognize and deciding to wait for clarification. Constantine stared at his hand. Bollocks. I'm not immune to magic. Ainz's tone remained educational. Your spell is simply asking permission from a system that doesn't acknowledge your authority to grant permissions. It's trying to execute, but the framework is checking credentials you don't have. Fate's voice carried strain for the first time. This is not possible under natural law. Then natural law is incomplete. Ainz returned to his throne. I'm not your enemy. I'm not trying to conquer your world or destroy your civilization. I'm establishing a sovereign space and asking you to respect it. Everything else is negotiable. And if we refuse, Zatanna's hands still glowed with power, then we educate. Ainz settled into the throne. But education is time-consuming, and I prefer efficiency. Fate's light intensified. Constantine recognized the build-up. The Lord of Order was preparing something significant. A sealing ritual, probably, the kind that locked dimensional anomalies back where they belonged. Dr. Fate? Demiurge's voice carried warning. I wouldn't. Your permission is not required. Fate's hands moved through patterns that bent probability itself. Sealing sigils erupted around Nazaric golden chains of cosmic law, wrapping around the structure's foundation. For 3 seconds it looked like it might work. The sigils held. The chains tightened. Reality itself seemed to recognize the Lord of Order's authority. Then the sigils flickered. The chains loosened. And across every surface, text appeared in a font that belonged in video games, not cosmic judgments. Cooldown, 72 hours. Ability restricted, divine seal reason, insufficient system authority. Fate's light dimmed. The helmet tilted forward a gesture that might have been shock, if cosmic entities did shock. What did you do? His voice carried actual confusion. Nothing. Ainz leaned back. Your ability activated. It was recognized, and it was placed on cooldown, because this space doesn't grant you administrative privileges. You're a user, not a moderator. The distinction matters. Constantine started laughing. Couldn't help it. Hysteria mixed with genuine appreciation for the absurdity. We're in a video game. We walked into a bloody video game and now our powers have cooldowns. Crude analogy. Demiurge adjusted his glasses, but functionally accurate. Zatanna's spell dissolved. No point maintaining it. Constantine's charms felt suddenly useless. Fate's light had dimmed to barely a glow. They'd walked in with all the authority of their world behind them. And it meant nothing here. Ainz stood again. This conversation is concluded. You understand what Nazaric is. You understand the boundaries. You understand the consequences of crossing them. What you do with that understanding is your choice. But you're not giving us a choice. Constantine's voice had lost its edge. Just exhaustion now. I'm giving you the choice to accept reality efficiently or learn it through demonstration. Ainz walked toward the exit. One path involves significantly less suffering. I recommend it. Demiurge gestured toward the door. The maids will escort you to the boundary. Please do return if you have further questions. We value open communication. Constantine stood. His legs felt shaky. Zatanna helped Fate down. The Lord of Order was hovering lower now. Light diminished clearly, trying to process what had just happened to cosmic law. They walked through Nazaric's corridors in silence. The maids led them professionally, politely like guests, leaving a dinner party instead of diplomats who just had their authority revoked. At the boundary, Constantine turned back. The tomb sat unchanged, patient, waiting. We just got played. His voice was quiet. We got educated, Zatanna corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Constantine lit another cigarette with shaking hands. Fate spoke last voice, carrying exhaustion that shouldn't be possible for a cosmic entity. We came seeking negotiation. We left understanding that negotiation was never an option, only acceptance or conflict. And conflict would cost more than we can afford. They crossed back into Gotham proper. The city continued its rhythms, oblivious to the fact that 3 of its most powerful defenders had just learned exactly how little power they actually held. Behind them, Nazarick waited. Not hostile, not peaceful, just present like a fact that couldn't be argued away, no matter how much anyone wished otherwise. The balance had shifted, permanently. Batman didn't believe in unwinnable scenarios. Every system had exploits. Every fortress had weak points. Nazarick had demonstrated control over its territory, but control required maintenance. Maintenance required systems, and systems could be disrupted. He stood in the Batcave, surrounded by weeks of contingency planning, compressed into 18 hours. Holographic displays showed the zone from every angle. Satellite imagery, thermal scans, electromagnetic spectrum analysis. Every piece of data Argus had gathered before their equipment stopped making sense. You're going in? Superman's voice carried concern, not judgment. We're going in. Batman didn't look away from the displays. Coordinated strike, multiple entry points, overwhelming technical superiority. We hit them before they can adapt. Wonder Woman studied the tactical map. The diplomatic approach failed. You're escalating to military response. I'm escalating to information warfare. Batman pulled up a new schematic. They control their territory through some kind of localized reality manipulation. But manipulation requires processing power. Enough simultaneous inputs and their system gets overwhelmed. That's when we extract real intelligence. Clark crossed his arms. Bruce, they put cooldowns on cosmic magic. What makes you think conventional tactics will work? Because conventional tactics are predictable. Batman's fingers moved across the keyboard. Which means they'll prepare for conventional tactics. Which means I'm not using conventional tactics. He activated a sequence that lit up the cave with blue light. Drones. Dozens of them. Each carrying payloads designed not to destroy, but to confuse. Electromagnetic pulse generators. Reality anchors borrowed from star labs. Frequency disruptors calibrated to interfere with spatial manipulation. We make them defend everywhere at once. Batman's tone carried absolute certainty. Their resources get divided. Their attention splits. And in that moment, we learn something they don't want us to know. Diana's eyes narrowed. This feels like a mistake. Then it's a mistake that yields data. Batman activated the launch sequence. Either way, we learn. The drones deployed at midnight. 50 units approaching from different vectors, each programmed with independent flight patterns to prevent coordinated countermeasures. Batman watched from a mobile command center positioned 3 blocks outside the zone, surrounded by equipment that represented the pinnacle of human and metahuman technology. The first drone crossed the boundary. Every screen in the command center flickered. Not static, not interference. Just a momentary hiccup like reality buffering. Batman's jaw tightened. All units maintain approach vector. The drones continued inward. 30 seconds. 1 minute. 90 seconds. No response from Nazarick. No defensive measures. Just that persistent sense of being observed. Then the countdown appeared. Not on Batman's screens. In the air itself, hovering like subtitles over the drones. Foreign object detected classification. Unauthorized technology initiating countermeasures. Batman started typing commands. Activate EMP burst, frequency shift alpha through omega, deploy reality anchors. Nothing happened. The drones hung motionless in the air, not falling, not damaged, just frozen like paused video. The countdown continued. 3, 2, 1. The drones dropped. Not destroyed, just deactivated, falling to the ground with the gentle precision of someone setting down items they no longer needed. Batman's fingers flew across the keyboard. Backup systems, redundant protocols, every failsafe he'd built into the operation. All of them reported the same status, waiting for authorization. They're not blocking us? Superman's voice carried disbelief. They're asking our equipment for permission to function. A figure appeared on the main screen. Not transmitted, not hacked into their feed. Just present, like the display had decided to show something different. A maid stood in what looked like Nazarik's entrance hall. Short hair, emotionless expression. She held what appeared to be a futuristic rifle. Your drones have been collected. Her voice was flat professional. They will be returned at the boundary in 1 hour, minus any components capable of surveillance or data transmission. Batman leaned forward. Under what authority? Territorial sovereignty. The maid tilted her head slightly. You violated the boundary with hostile technology. The technology has been neutralized. No further action is required. The screen went black. Batman stared at the dead display for 3 seconds. Then he started typing again. Plan Beta. Ground insertion. Human assets only. No technology above baseline. Bruce. Diana's hand found his shoulder. This isn't working. Then we try something else. Batman stood already moving toward the exit. I'm not accepting defeat from a system that shouldn't exist. He assembled a team. Not the League, not heroes. Specialists. People who knew how to move through hostile territory without relying on gadgets. Former special forces. Covert operators. 3 individuals who'd survived situations that killed everyone else and learned to trust nothing but their own skills. They entered the zone at 0300 hours. No equipment beyond basic clothing. No weapons beyond what they could carry and use without electronics. Batman led from the center, every sense alert for the trap he knew was coming. It came silently. One moment empty street. The next figures emerging from shadows that hadn't been there. A maid with green hair and insectoid features. Another with purple hair and a smile that belonged on something hunting. A third in white moving with mechanical precision. The operatives reacted instantly. Training kicking in. Hand-to-hand combat protocols designed for meta-human threats. It didn't matter. The green-haired maid gestured. Sound distorted became wrong. Turned into something that made the operatives clutch their heads. Not pain. Just confusion, like their inner ears had been told to process information that made no biological sense. The purple-haired one didn't move. She just stood there, smiling. 2 of the operatives ran toward her, got within 3 feet, stopped. Batman saw it happen. Saw them freeze mid-motion expressions, changing from aggression to blank confusion. The maid's form rippled like she wasn't entirely solid under the surface. The third maid moved with mechanical precision. Not fast, not slow, just inevitable. She reached the remaining operative, touched his shoulder, and he collapsed. Not unconscious. Just offline, like someone had pressed a power button. Batman found himself facing all 3 maids, while his team lay scattered behind him. Still alive. Still breathing. Just removed from the equation with casual efficiency. You're persistent? The white-haired maid spoke first. This is the 2nd infiltration attempt in 4 hours. Pattern recognition suggests you will try a 3rd. Batman's hand moved toward his belt. Stopped. What was he reaching for? Equipment that wouldn't work. Tricks that required technology he couldn't use. You're evaluating options. The purple-haired maid's smile widened. It's endearing. Most people panic by now. I don't panic. Batman's voice stayed level. I adapt. To what? The green-haired maid tilted her head, the motion unsettlingly insectile. You've tried technology. You've tried human skill. Both failed. What adaptation remains? Batman met her eyes, understanding why you're not killing us. The maids exchanged glances. The white-haired one spoke. Lord Ainz's orders are clear. Capture, demonstrate superiority, release with understanding. Understanding of what? That continued resistance wastes everyone's time. The purple-haired maid stepped closer. We're not enemies. We're inevitabilities. You can accept that efficiently or learn it through repeated failure. The outcome is identical. Behind Batman, his team started to stir. The green-haired maid made a gesture, and they stopped moving again. Not harmed. Just paused like someone had hit a temporal buffer. Your people will be fine. The white-haired maid's tone stayed professional. They'll wake at the boundary with no lasting damage. You, however, are required to witness something. She gestured toward a building that hadn't been a building moments ago. Architecture that looked grown rather than constructed. An entrance that suggested depths Batman's tactical sense insisted shouldn't fit in the available space. Lord Ainz wants you to see. The maid started walking. Not because he needs your approval, because he prefers you understand the scope of what you're attempting to challenge. Batman followed. Not because he wanted to, because standing still meant learning nothing, and learning nothing meant this entire operation had been pointless. They entered a chamber that defied spatial logic. Vast, organized, filled with equipment that looked like it belonged in 3 different technological eras simultaneously. And at the center screens displaying information that made Batman's threat assessment spike. Complete intelligence on Justice League operations. Communication protocols, response patterns, psychological profiles. Everything Argus knew. Everything Star Labs had theorized. Everything the League thought was secured behind quantum encryption and mystical wards. Demiurge stood in front of the displays adjusting his glasses. Ah, Batman. I was hoping you'd arrive. Your tactical approach has been quite instructive. Batman stared at the screens. Months of operational security. Years of carefully constructed contingencies, all of it laid out like a research paper. How long have you been inside our systems? Since the moment we arrived. Demiurge smiled. Your security is adequate for threats you understand. We're not a threat you understand. The distinction matters. Batman's mind raced through implications. If they had this level of access, they could have struck anywhere. Could have eliminated key assets. Could have crippled the League's operational capacity. They hadn't. You wanted us to know. Batman's voice went quiet. This entire display is psychological warfare, correct? Demiurge turned to face him fully. We wanted you to understand that resistance isn't brave. It's inefficient. You're fighting an opponent who has already won every engagement before you commit resources. The only question is how long you insist on learning that fact. The maids appeared behind Batman. Not threatening, just present, ready to escort him back to the boundary whenever the lesson concluded. Your team will be returned shortly. Demiurge gestured dismissively. Your drones are already at the perimeter minus surveillance components, as promised. And you will return to your allies with understanding that no tactical approach will succeed against an opponent who operates under different rules. Batman said nothing. No threats, no defiance. Just cold calculation processing the reality he was being forced to accept. This isn't defeat. Demiurge's smile softened slightly. This is education. Lord Ainz values informed neighbors over ignorant enemies. Consider yourself informed. Batman was escorted to the boundary. His team materialized beside him, dazed but unharmed. The drones sat in neat rows, stripped of anything useful but otherwise intact. and overhead Nazarick waited in patient stillness. Superman and Wonder Woman rushed forward as Batman crossed back into Gotham proper. "What happened?" Clark's voice carried concern. Batman looked back at the zone. "We lost. Completely. Comprehensively. Not because we fought poorly, but because the rules never applied to us. They demonstrated that every resource we have is useless against an opponent who doesn't acknowledge our authority to use those resources." Diana's expression hardened. "Then we find another way." "There is no other way." Batman's tone carried exhaustion and something worse. Acceptance. "They're not fighting us. They're just explaining why fighting them is pointless. And they're right." He turned away from Nazarick, heading toward the command center to shut down operations that no longer had purpose. Behind him, the zone remained undisturbed. No casualties. No destruction. Just another lesson delivered with clinical precision to people who thought tactics and technology could overcome authority they didn't comprehend. The counteroffensive was over. The only question remaining was how long it would take everyone else to accept what Batman had just learned. Some boundaries couldn't be crossed. Some rules couldn't be broken. And some realities don't ask for permission. They just arrive. The decision came from the top. The President. The Security Council. Every authority figure who'd watched Nazarick humiliate their best efforts at understanding or containment. The diplomatic approach had failed. Reconnaissance had been neutralized. Batman's tactical strike had demonstrated nothing except futility, which left one option. The Justice League. Full deployment. Not as ambassadors or investigators. As a force capable of addressing threats that exceeded conventional response parameters. They assembled at the perimeter as dawn broke over Gotham. Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Constantine, Satana. Even Aquaman had arrived from Atlantis, trident in hand, having heard about a sovereignty claim that reminded him uncomfortably of surface nations declaring ownership over ocean territories. "This is a mistake." Constantine lit a cigarette, hands steady despite his words. "We're walking into a meat grinder that doesn't need meat. We're establishing that Earth has defenders who won't be intimidated." Superman's jaw was set. They want respect. They need to understand what they're asking respect from. Batman studied the zone through enhanced lenses. No thermal signatures, no electromagnetic emissions, no evidence of defensive preparations. Either they're not worried, or they're prepared in ways we can't detect, or both. Wonder Woman adjusted her bracers. "Which means we proceed with maximum caution and overwhelming force." They crossed the boundary as a unit. 6 of the most powerful beings on Earth, moving with coordinated precision, born from years of facing extinction-level threats together. The zone accepted them without resistance. No alarms, no countermeasures. Just that familiar sense of reality, bending slightly to accommodate rules that predated their arrival. They made it 300 yards before the terrain changed. The street ahead rippled. Not breaking, not collapsing, just becoming something else. Cobblestones turned to marble. Warehouses became architecture that belonged in Gothic horror, filtered through fantasy aesthetics. And in the center of this transformed landscape, a figure waited. Small, female, dressed in an elaborate gown that looked Victorian by way of something older and darker. Blonde hair, red eyes, a smile that suggested she found this entire situation delightful. "Oh!" Her voice carried childlike wonder. "They sent everyone. Lord Ainz will be pleased." Superman stepped forward. "We're here to negotiate. Stand down and no one gets hurt." The girl's smile widened. "Negotiate? How quaint. But I'm afraid negotiation time expired when you crossed the threshold. This is Nazarick territory, and I am Shaltir Bloodfallen Guardian of the first 3 floors." She moved. Superman barely registered the motion before she was in front of him, small fist connecting with his jaw. The impact sent him back 20 feet, boots tearing furrows in transformed stone. Wonder Woman reacted instantly, lasso whipping out to entangle the girl. The golden rope wrapped tight, binding arms to sides. Diana pulled, invoking the lasso's power to compel truth and submission. For half a second it held. Shaltyr's eyes widened. Oh, that's interesting. The lasso flickered. Text appeared in the air around Wonder Woman's hands, visible only for an instant. Cooldown triggered, divine restraint duration. 72 hours. Reason target operates under different authority framework. The lasso went slack. Not broken. Just inactive, like a tool waiting for authorization that wouldn't come. Diana stared at her hands. That's not possible. It's adorable that you still think that matters. Shaltyr shrugged off the rope. Your turn. She became a blur. Not super speed in the way Superman understood it. Something different. Combat so refined it looked choreographed, each movement flowing into the next with mechanical precision. Superman moved to intercept. Aquaman raised his trident, channeling Atlantean magic. Constantine started an incantation designed to bind vampiric entities. A voice cut through the chaos. Male, cold, carrying absolute authority. Shaltyr maintained demonstration protocol. The vampire stopped mid-strike, fist inches from Aquaman's face. She stepped back, curtsying. As you command, Lord Ainz. A second figure appeared. Taller, armor that gleamed white and black. Wings folded against her back. She moved with the same mechanical precision as Shaltyr. But where the vampire carried playful menace, this one radiated absolute defense. I am Albedo. Her voice was formal, inflectionless. Overseer of the Guardians, you will proceed no further. Batman's tactical assessment spiked. This wasn't escalation. This was phasing. They were being introduced to capability layers, each more dangerous than the last. This is a raid. He said it quietly, more to himself than anyone else. They're treating this like a video game raid. We're not fighting, we're being tested. Superman heard him. So did Wonder Woman. Both hesitated, processing the implication. Constantine finished his binding spell. Threw it with all the force of someone who'd banished demons from 3 dimensions. The spell hit Albedo directly. Text appeared in front of Constantine's eyes. Cheat detected, unauthorized reality manipulation countermeasure, reflect. The spell bounced. Not deflected, not absorbed, just returned to sender like an email to an invalid address. Constantine took the full force of his own magic, staggering back as bindings wrapped around his arms. Bloody hell. He struggled against his own spell. It thinks magic is cheating. Because it is. A third figure emerged from shadows that hadn't existed moments before. Massive, insectoid, carrying multiple weapons that looked designed for different forms of lethality. I am Cocytus, 4th floor guardian. You will stop. His voice carried absolute cold, not temperature, just finality. Aquaman raised his trident. We represent the surface world's authority. You have no right to. Cocytus moved, one hand extended. The trident froze mid-swing, not grabbed, not blocked, just stopped, like someone had paused the game. You misunderstand. Cocytus didn't release the trident, just held it motionless. Authority is demonstrated, not claimed. The terrain shifted again. 2 smaller figures appeared on opposite sides of the league. Twins. One confident and aggressive. One shy and clutching a massive staff. Aura. The girl grinned. And my brother Mare. We're the 6th floor guardians. And this is our territory. The ground responded to Mare's touch. Marble cracked. Stone reformed. The entire battlefield became fluid, reshaping itself around the league like clay being molded by invisible hands. Superman tried to fly. Couldn't. Not held down. just heavy like gravity had been selectively increased around him. Wonder Woman drew her sword. Albedo was there instantly, hand catching the blade mid-swing. The metal should have cut through flesh. Instead, it stopped held by fingers that registered the weapon and decided it wasn't a threat. "You're holding back." Diana's voice carried both accusation and realization. "All of you. You could kill us." "Yes." Albedo's expression didn't change. "But Lord Ainz's orders are clear. Demonstrate superiority. Do not eliminate. You are not enemies. You are students learning an uncomfortable lesson." Batman watched the situation deteriorate. 6 League members, 5 Guardians visible with implications of more weighting deeper in the structure. Every tactical advantage they'd relied on Superman's strength. Diana's weapons, Constantine's magic being systematically neutralized, not through superior power, but through framework incompatibility. They weren't losing a fight, they were failing a system check. "We need to withdraw." Batman's voice cut through the chaos. "This isn't accomplishing anything except proving their point. We can't just leave." Superman struggled against the increased gravity. "If we retreat, they win. They've already won." Batman gestured at the transformed battlefield. "Look around. We're in their environment fighting by their rule using powers they've already accounted for. Every second we stay is just additional data for their analysis." Zatanna had been quiet observing. Now she spoke, voice tight with realization. "He's right. This isn't combat. It's performance review. They're cataloging our capabilities and limitations." Shaltir clapped her hands. "Oh, someone gets it. Yes, exactly that. We're measuring you. Seeing what you can do when you try really hard." She tilted her head. "Spoiler, it's not enough." Constantine finally broke free of his own binding spell, gasping. "So what, we just accept this, let them sit on Gotham like a tumor and smile about it? You accept reality?" Demiurge's voice preceded his appearance. He walked through the transformed terrain like he owned it, which Batman realized he effectively did. "You accept that Nazarick exists as a sovereign entity. You accept that your authority ends at our boundary. You accept that attempting to change these facts is expensive and futile." The demon stopped in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by Guardians and League members in various states of frustrated restraint. Lord Ainz could have ended this in the first moment. Could have eliminated you as threats. Could have demonstrated force sufficient to make you fear approaching within a mile of our territory. Demiurge's smile was polite, professional, terrifying. Instead, he chose patience, education, the opportunity for you to understand through experience rather than trauma. "How generous." Wonder Woman's sarcasm cut through the tension. "It is." Demiurge adjusted his glasses. "You'll understand that eventually. Probably around the time you realize we've let you walk away from 4 separate engagements that could have ended with casualties. We're not your enemies. We're simply facts you haven't accepted yet." A presence filled the space, not physical, not visible. Just there, like reality itself had decided to pay attention. The Guardian straightened. Even Shaltir's playful demeanor shifted to something more formal. Ainz Ooal Gown stepped into the transformed battlefield. His skeletal form moved with deliberate grace, robes trailing behind like shadows given weight. He surveyed the scene with red eyes that revealed nothing except patient observation. "You came seeking confrontation." His voice carried no emotion. "You received demonstration. The lesson should be clear." Superman found his voice. "We have a responsibility to protect this planet, and I have responsibility to protect Nazarick." Ainz tilted his head slightly. "These responsibilities don't conflict unless you force them to conflict. I claimed territory sufficient for our needs. I established boundaries. I requested respect for those boundaries. Everything that followed was your choice." Batman stepped forward, the only League member not actively restrained or debilitated. You're asking us to accept a foreign power establishing sovereignty on Earth's soil without consultation or consent. No. Ainz's skeletal fingers drummed once against his robe. I'm informing you that sovereignty has been established. Consultation wasn't required. Consent is irrelevant. The only choice you have is how you respond to that fact. Aquaman found his feet, though the trident remained frozen in Cocytus's grip. Then you're declaring war. War is expensive. Ainz's tone didn't change. War requires commitment of resources to eliminate threats. You're not threats. You're neighbors learning property lines. The distinction matters. Wonder Woman's hand tightened on her sword hilt, still held by Albedo's effortless grip. This isn't over. It was over before it began. Ainz gestured minutely. The Guardians relaxed their holds. The terrain began reverting to normal. You fought well. You demonstrated the capabilities that make you protectors of this world. But capabilities have contexts. And this context doesn't favor you. Constantine helped Zatanna to her feet. So what now? We just go home and pretend a piece of Gotham belongs to someone else. You acknowledge reality. Ainz turned toward Nazarick. Then you decide if continued testing of that reality serves any purpose beyond wasting everyone's time. He walked away. The Guardians followed Shaltir, waving cheerfully as she departed. Demiurge paused, looking back at the League. You're welcome to try again. Lord Ainz values thorough education. But consider that each attempt teaches us more about you than you learn about us. The ratio becomes less favorable with each iteration. Then they were gone. The transformed terrain finished reverting. The League stood in what looked like a normal Gotham street if you ignored the fact that they'd just been systematically dismantled by opponents who treated the engagement like a training exercise. Superman looked at his hands. I couldn't touch her. Shaltir, she was stronger, not stronger. Batman's voice was quiet. Operating under different rules. Your strength requires physics, you understand. Her strength doesn't care about your understanding. Wonder Woman examined her lasso. The divine weapon that had bound gods and monsters. Reduced to a tool waiting for permission it would never receive. Constantine lit another cigarette with shaking hands. We lost, again. But worse this time because we brought everything, and it didn't matter. Zatanna stared at where Nazarick rose in the distance. They're not even trying. They're just existing. And existence is enough to make us irrelevant, to make us... Aquaman retrieved his trident from where Cocytus had left it. The weapon was undamaged. A courtesy. A reminder that damage had been optional. We report this to the Security Council. Superman's voice carried exhaustion. Tell them that military intervention isn't viable. They won't accept that. Batman turned away from the zone. They'll try something else. Something bigger. And it will fail the same way. Then what do we do? Wonder Woman looked at each of them. Just surrender. Accept that a piece of Earth belongs to an external power. Batman was silent for a long moment. Then, we do what Ainz suggested. We acknowledge reality, because reality doesn't require our approval to exist. They walked back toward the perimeter. Behind them, Nazarick waited. Patient, unmoved. A fact that had arrived and would not be leaving regardless of what anyone thought about it. The raid was over. The boss encounters had been demonstrations, not battles. And the only thing the League had gained was understanding of exactly how outmatched they were when playing by rules they couldn't rewrite. Some lessons couldn't be avoided, only accepted. And this was a lesson Earth was learning slowly, painfully, one failed engagement at a time. The Guardians had shown mercy. The question was how long that mercy would last if people kept testing it. Batman suspected they'd find out soon enough. Humans were excellent at many things. Accepting limitations wasn't one of them. The world watched. Not just Gotham, not just America. Every nation with satellite capability, every intelligence agency with assets in the field. They all saw the Justice League retreat, and they all reached the same conclusion. If the League couldn't resolve this, nobody could. Plans were drawn for coordinated strikes, nuclear options, cosmic interventions. None of it mattered. Because while humanity debated, Ainz Ooal made a decision that rendered every discussion obsolete. He stood in his throne room, alone, except for shadows that had learned to be silent in his presence. The Guardians waited on their respective floors, ready to defend, but not needed. The Pleiades maintained perimeter security, professional and vigilant. Demiurge had compiled final reports. Analysis, complete recommendations submitted. Everything was ready. Ainz raised one skeletal hand. Around him the air changed. Not frozen, not stopped. Just delayed like time itself had been asked to wait a moment while something important happened. The effect rippled outward from Nazarick in expanding circles. Anyone watching from outside the zone saw it. Saw the structure pulse with energy that didn't register on any known spectrum. Saw reality bend around it like water flowing around a stone too large to move. Inside, Nazarick Albedo appeared at Ainz's side. "Lord Ainz, the preparations are complete. The core relic responds to your command." Ainz nodded slowly. "Then we proceed." He walked through corridors that had become familiar over these few days. Past chambers where Guardians maintained eternal watch. Through halls where Pleiades ensured every system operated at peak efficiency. Down to the deepest level where Nazarick's foundation touched something older than the building itself. The core relic waited. Not an artifact in the traditional sense. More a concentration of authority, a crystallization of the rules that allowed Nazarick to exist as a sovereign space. Ainz had studied it carefully since their arrival, understanding its parameters, its limitations, its possibilities. Now he would use it for its intended purpose. His hand touched the relic's surface. Cold. Not temperature, but finality. The sensation of something that had decided how things would be and wouldn't be argued with. Power flowed through the connection. Not magic in the way this world understood it. Not energy that could be measured or countered. Just authority pure and absolute, declaring that certain facts would now be enforced regardless of what anyone else thought. The zone responded immediately. Outside, watchers saw Nazarick's influence begin to contract. The quarter-mile radius that had overlapped Gotham's streets started pulling inward. Buildings that had been transformed reverted to their original state. Streets that had bent to alien geometry straightened. The game-like interface that had confused Argus equipment flickered and faded. But Nazarick itself remained. Growing smaller in physical footprint, but denser in presence. The structure compressed, folding in on itself in ways that didn't violate physics, so much as politely inform physics, that it wasn't relevant to this particular situation. Batman watched from his command center instruments, tracking the change. It's withdrawing, consolidating. Superman stood beside him, still processing their defeat from hours earlier. Why now? What changed? Nothing changed. Wonder Woman's voice carried grim understanding. This is what they wanted all along. They demonstrated they could expand, could maintain a larger territory, and now they're showing they don't need to. The threat of expansion is enough. Constantine appeared in the doorway, teleportation still working now that he was outside Nazarick's direct influence. It's not withdrawing, it's locking the door. Big difference. Dr. Fate materialized beside him, the helm's light dimmer than usual. The rift is sealing, not from external force, from internal authority. Nazarick is severing its connection to the bleed, while maintaining its presence in our reality. Batman's fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up data that made increasingly less sense. That shouldn't be possible. You can't exist in a dimension and simultaneously close the door behind you, unless you're not in the dimension. Fate's voice carried the weight of cosmic understanding grudgingly acquired. Unless you've created a pocket space that merely intersects with our reality at specific coordinates. They're not occupying Earth. They're adjacent to it, touching at a single point they control absolutely. The zone contracted further. 100 yards, 50, 20, until it existed as a sphere of influence so small it contained only Nazarick itself and nothing else. The transformed warehouses had returned to normal. The street that had bent now ran straight. Even the frost patterns that had marked where Pleiades stood had faded. But Nazarick remained. Smaller, denser, absolutely present despite occupying almost no space at all. And then quietly, without announcement or ceremony, the rift closed, not sealed by force, not bound by magic. Just closed like a door being pulled shut by someone who'd finished their business and no longer needed it open. Fate felt it immediately. The cosmic wound that had worried him for days simply stopped existing. The bleed knitted itself back together, accepting the closure as natural and appropriate. The presence stopped observing. The specter's attention moved elsewhere. Whatever cosmic concern had been raised by Nazarick's arrival simply evaporated. It's done. Fate's voice carried something that might have been relief or might have been resignation. Nazarick is no longer an anomaly. It's a permanent fixture, self-contained, self-sustaining, no longer requiring any connection to external reality except the one it chooses to maintain. Batman pulled up satellite imagery. The tomb sat in the same location, but every sensor reported something different. Some said it wasn't there at all. Others claimed it occupied negative space. A few insisted it was everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The only consensus was that it existed, and attempts to interact with it without permission would be counterproductive. Inside, Nazarick Ainz returned to his throne room. The procedure was complete. The territory was established. The boundaries were set. Everything had proceeded exactly as necessary. Demiurge waited with a report. The contraction was observed worldwide. 16 nations have already revised their tactical assessments. 4 have proposed diplomatic overtures. The United Nations is drafting recognition protocols. Recognition remains optional. Ainz settled into his throne, but their willingness to offer it is noted. Lord Ainz. Albedo's voice carried formality appropriate for official pronouncements. Shall we establish formal boundaries? Communications protocols? Trade agreements? No. Ainz's skeletal fingers drummed once. We establish nothing except what already exists. A territory that is ours. A boundary that must not be crossed without permission. Everything else can be addressed if and when it becomes necessary. He paused, red eyes glowing faintly in the chamber's gloom. They wanted to know our intentions, our goals, our plans for expansion or conquest. The answer is simple. We have no such plans. We claimed what we needed. We established the authority to protect it. That task is now complete. Shaltir appeared in the doorway, having returned from her floor. So we just sit here forever? That sounds boring. Then find ways to not be bored. Ainz's tone didn't change. But do so within our territory. The world outside is not our concern unless it chooses to make itself our concern. The Guardians understood. The Pleiades understood. Even those who might have preferred more aggressive expansion accepted the logic. Nazarick had made its point, demonstrated its capability, established its presence. Further action would be redundant. Outside, the world tried to make sense of what had just happened. Governments drafted policies for interacting with sovereign territories that existed in legal limbo. The Justice League compiled reports analyzing capabilities they'd witnessed. Argus updated threat assessments with the uncomfortable conclusion that threat implied capacity for violence, and Nazarick had demonstrated violence was optional. Constantine stood at the boundary, smoking and staring at the structure that looked simultaneously closer and further away than before. So that's it. They show up, prove we can't touch them, then just sit there being untouchable. That's exactly it. Batman had joined him, cape moving in wind that seemed uncertain whether it should exist near Nazarick. They're not conquering. They're not expanding. They're just existing in a way that forces us to acknowledge their existence. Feels wrong. Constantine took a drag, like we should do something. We tried doing something. Wonder Woman approached from behind, voice tired. 4 times. Each attempt taught us the same thing. We're not equipped to challenge someone who operates under different authority. Superman landed beside them, the last to arrive. He'd been flying around the city, checking on people who'd been near the zone, making sure everyone was safe. Everyone was. That somehow made it worse. If Nazarick had caused casualties, destroyed property, harmed civilians, the League would know how to respond. But this was just presence, and presence couldn't be fought. We should establish contact. Clark's voice carried determination despite exhaustion. Formal channels. Make sure they understand we're available if they need anything. They don't need anything. Batman's tone was flat. That's the point. They're completely self-sufficient. The only thing they needed from us was acknowledgement that they exist. And we've provided that through repeated demonstrations of our inability to make them leave. Dr. Fate appeared last, teleporting directly to the group. I have consulted with the Presence. Nazarick is no longer considered a cosmic concern. It has been accepted as a permanent fixture of this reality operating under sovereign authority that predates this universe's current framework. Constantine laughed, couldn't help it. So God looked at them and said, "That's fine. Brilliant. Just brilliant." The Presence recognized inevitability. Fate's voice carried cosmic exhaustion. Nazarick exists. It will continue to exist. No amount of force or prayer or cosmic intervention will change that fact. Therefore, acceptance is the only logical response. They stood in silence, 5 of Earth's most powerful defenders, staring at a problem they couldn't solve because it wasn't actually a problem, just a reality they didn't like. From inside, Nazarick Ainz observed them through methods they couldn't detect, saw them processing, accepting, learning to live with neighbors they never wanted. Good. That was the goal. Not conquest, not subjugation, just the establishment of a boundary and the understanding that boundaries would be respected. He turned away from the observation, settling deeper into his throne. The great tomb of Nazarick had arrived, had established territory, had demonstrated why that territory would remain unchallenged. The mission, as far as one existed, was complete. Everything else was just maintenance. Outside, the world adjusted. Maps were redrawn to show Nazarick as a special administrative zone with unclear sovereignty. Flight paths were redirected to avoid airspace that technically didn't belong to anyone, but practically belonged to whoever sat in that black stone tomb. People learned to walk different routes, not from fear, but from the same instinct that made them avoid sacred ground or military installations. Nazarick had become part of Gotham's landscape. Not welcomed, not wanted, just there like a mountain that had decided to relocate and was now too permanent to dispute. And in his throne room, Ainz Ooal spoke his final assessment to Guardians who would remember it as doctrine. We don't need their approval. We don't need their friendship. We don't need their understanding. We need them to know where the boundary is and respect it. That task is complete. Everything else is secondary. The words echoed through empty halls. Final. Absolute. The door was closed. The boundary was understood. The watchtower felt different now. Not damaged, not compromised, just changed in ways none of them could articulate. Batman stood at the observation window, watching Earth rotate below with the same patterns it had always followed. Cities lit the night. Weather systems moved across continents. Humanity continued its perpetual dance of chaos and order. Except now there was a dark spot on the map. A place where authority answered to different rules. Superman entered the conference room first, moving with the exhaustion of someone who'd spent 3 days helping people understand that nothing had actually changed except their understanding of what was possible. Diana followed, still wearing her armor, despite being off active duty. She hadn't taken it off since the raid. Batman understood. When you couldn't protect something, you at least wanted to look ready to try. Constantine and Zatanna arrived together, both carrying the weight of magic users who'd learned their craft, had limitations they'd never suspected. Dr. Fate materialized last, his light dimmer than it had been a week ago. Even cosmic authority, it seemed, could be exhausted. The UN Security Council is drafting a resolution. Superman broke the silence. Recognizing Nazarick as an autonomous territory under special administrative status, they're calling it a compromise. It's surrender with paperwork. Constantine lit a cigarette despite regulations. Nobody stopped him. They're just making official what we already learned the hard way. Batman turned from the window. What's Argus's assessment? Waller wants ongoing surveillance. Diana's voice carried skepticism. She's convinced there's a weakness we haven't found yet. Something that makes them vulnerable. There isn't. Batman pulled up a holographic display. Data from every encounter, every failed attempt, every humiliation carefully cataloged. They're not vulnerable because vulnerability requires operating under systems that recognize damage. They don't. Zatanna studied the data with professional interest. We could try the mystic approach again. Different schools of magic traditions they might not have accounted for. They've accounted for everything. Fate's voice carried certainty born from consultation with higher powers. I spoke with the presence. I spoke with entities that predate this universe's creation. The consensus is unanimous. Nazarick operates under authority frameworks that supersede local reality. Attempting to counter that is like trying to defeat mathematics with philosophy. So we do nothing? Superman's frustration leaked through his carefully maintained composure. We just accept that a piece of Earth is gone. It's not gone. Batman closed the display. It's just no longer ours. There's a difference. The words hung in the air. 5 of the most powerful beings on Earth reduced to accepting a reality they couldn't change through force cunning or cosmic intervention. Constantine exhaled smoke slowly. I've been doing this for 30 years. Fought demons, angels, things that don't fit in either category. Always found a way to win, even if winning looked like losing, until the last second. He paused. This is the first time I can't find the angle, the trick, the loophole that turns everything around. Because there is no loophole. Batman's tone was final. Nazarick isn't breaking any rules we can exploit. They established their own rules, and those rules are enforced through authority we don't have access to. Diana removed her tiara, setting it on the table, a gesture of informality of admitting vulnerability. So, Earth has a neighbor we can't remove and can't control. What does that mean for us? It means we adapt. Batman pulled up a new display. Maps showing revised tactical assessments, updated threat response protocols, new contingencies for scenarios involving Nazarick. We establish clear communication channels. We respect the boundary they've set. We monitor for any indication they're planning expansion. And we prepare for the possibility that other entities might follow their example. Superman straightened. You think more will come? Nazarick proved it's possible. Batman's jaw tightened. They showed that reality can be bent to accommodate external authority frameworks. Other entities watching this situation just learned that Earth's defenders, including cosmic powers, can be neutralized through system incompatibility. That's information. Zatanna paled slightly. So this isn't the end? It's a precedent. It's a precedent we can't prevent. Fate's light pulsed once. The cosmic community is already discussing implications. Some entities are intrigued. Others are concerned. All of them now know that Earth has demonstrated it cannot repel sophisticated dimensional authority claims. The implications settled over the room like weight. Constantine broke the silence with dark humor. Well, that's comforting. We went from, how do we deal with Nazarick, to, how do we deal with everyone who wants to be the next Nazarick? By learning. Batman's voice cut through the despair. Nazarick taught us something important. We've been operating under the assumption that Earth's sovereignty is absolute. That any external threat can be countered through sufficient application of force strategy or cosmic intervention. That assumption is wrong. He pulled up a final image. Nazarick as it existed now, small, dense, absolutely present despite its minimal footprint. They didn't invade. They didn't conquer. They just existed in a way that forced us to acknowledge them. And when we tried to challenge that existence, they demonstrated why challenge was futile. Batman turned to face the others. The lesson isn't that we're weak. It's that strength has contexts, and some contexts don't favor us. Superman moved to the window, looking down at Earth. So what do we tell people? How do we explain that their protectors couldn't protect them from this? We tell them the truth. Diana joined him at the window. That we faced an opponent who operated outside the frameworks we're equipped to handle. That we adapted. That we're still here, still watching, still ready to defend against threats we can counter. Nazarick, Zatanna asked quietly. Batman answered. Nazarick is a neighbor, not friendly, not hostile, just there. We maintain awareness. We establish protocols for interaction if it becomes necessary. We monitor for changes in their behavior. But we don't waste resources trying to remove something that's demonstrated it can't be removed. Constantine stubbed out his cigarette. Never thought I'd see the day where Batman advocates accepting defeat. This isn't defeat. Batman's tone sharpened. Defeat would be continuing to throw resources at an unsolvable problem. This is recognition of limitations and reallocation of assets toward achievable objectives. That's a very diplomatic way of saying we lost. Constantine stood. But fine, we accept the thing we can't change. We adapt to the new normal. We hope nothing worse decides to follow their example. He headed toward the door. I'll be at the pub if anyone needs me. Probably for the next week. Zatanna followed him out. Then fate light dimming as he teleported away. Diana lingered one hand on her lasso, as if reassuring herself it still existed, even if it didn't work the way she'd thought. This changes things. Her voice was soft. Not just tactically, philosophically. We built our entire approach on the assumption that enough determination could overcome any obstacle. Some obstacles aren't meant to be overcome. Superman's response surprised her. Some are meant to be navigated around, accepted, incorporated into how we see the world. He turned from the window. Nazarick is here. That's a fact. The question is what we do with that fact. Batman was already moving toward the exit. We do what we always do. We protect people. We respond to threats we can counter. We maintain readiness for scenarios within our capability to address. And we acknowledge that some things exist, whether we like them or not. He stopped at the doorway, looking back at Superman and Wonder Woman. The world adjusted. It's still adjusting. People are learning to live with a neighbor they never wanted. We do the same. Because that's what survival looks like when reality proves more complex than our understanding of it. Then he was gone, cape disappearing around the corner. Diana and Clark stood alone in the conference room, surrounded by displays showing a world that looked the same, but felt fundamentally different. "We tell the others," Diana asked. "We tell them what do they need to know?" Clark moved toward the door. "That Earth has changed. That we're still here. That some battles are won by knowing when not to fight." They left the conference room dark. The displays powered down. The watchtower continued its orbit, maintaining watch over a planet that had learned an uncomfortable lesson about sovereignty and power. Below, Gotham carried on. People avoided certain areas from instinct. Maps showed boundaries nobody had voted to establish. And in a space that was adjacent to reality, without quite being part of it, Nazarick waited with the patience of something that had proven its point and needed no further validation. The balance had shifted, permanently, irrevocably, and Earth's defenders had learned that some powers didn't need permission to exist. They just needed to be strong enough that permission became irrelevant. At the end of this story, nothing is truly conquered, and that is precisely the point. Ainz. Sama does not arrive in the DC universe as a warlord, nor as a savior. He arrives as something far more unsettling. A ruler who understands that survival is not about dominance, but about structure. Every step he takes is deliberate. He refuses immediate violence, not out of mercy, but because violence escalates unpredictably. Instead, he establishes boundaries, gathers information, and allows his opponents to test him fully so they can fail on their own terms. This is not restraint born from weakness. It is restraint born from certainty. Nazarick's policies follow the same logic. They do not expand recklessly. They do not annihilate resistance. They do not demand admiration or ideological alignment. They enforce only one condition: recognize the boundary. Their power is never expressed through destruction, but through inevitability. Systems stop working. Authority requests are denied. And the world adjusts, not because it is forced to kneel, but because continuing to resist becomes irrational. These are precisely the traits that highlight Ainz Sama's exceptional leadership abilities. It shows us that power is not invincible. It is that power, when paired with patience and clarity, reshapes reality more effectively than force ever could. One must know when to be firm and when to yield at the right time and in the right situation.